The story of an inspirational teacher turning around the lives of students has become a subgenre of film itself. You've got the Academy Award-winning Dead Poets Society, and other Oscar-nominated films such as Stand and Deliver or Music of the Heart, and even the highly successful Dangerous Minds. And yet there is one more ludicrous yet oddly charming film which you'll only be familiar with if you're a fan of the bad guy from John Wick 3.
Delightfully devilish, Seymour.
Yes, everybody, welcome to Delightfully Devilish, the show where we discuss films that meet the criteria of being the good, the bad, and the ugly all at once. I'm your host, Jukebox Harry, and today we're going back to 1993 and taking a look at the film Only the Strong. If you're familiar with star Mark Dacascos, you might recognize him from a series of critically or commercially unsuccessful films. These include the film adaptation of the video game Double Dragon, Crying Freeman, Cradle to the Grave, and the TV series The Crow, Stairway to Heaven. As mentioned, he most recently portrayed the villain Zero in John Wick 3 Parabellum, and that's one of only 2 films he's been in which has accrued a fresh critical rating on Rotten Tomatoes. But the film that's credited with being his breakout is Only the Strong, so let's go and take a look at it. So if you've seen any of those films I mentioned at the start about teachers inspiring the lives of students, you know essentially the entire plot of Only the Strong. Only the Strong follows former Green Beret Louis Stevens as he begins teaching at an inner-city school in Miami where students are at risk and poorly behaved, and the teachers have all lost any concern about helping them. The only thing that can save them is, get this, the art of capoeira. That is the premise of the film. And to be honest, I'm kind of a sucker for it. Every single character in Only the Strong is an archetype that you've seen in films countless times before. You have the empowering teacher protagonist who is almost perfect in every single way, though the story suggests that his ambition could become his downfall. You have a generic collection of uninspired teachers who have all given up hope on their jobs, like the public school teachers who tried to make me respect authority. Yeah, I wasn't a great kid. You have the one staff member who is willing to take a chance on the hero. You've got the one-dimensional love interest, the rebellious kids who couldn't land a role as sharks in the stage production of West Side Story and settled for this film instead, the one student who really believes in the goal, the gang member trying to drag him into a life of crime, and the generic cronies. You know exactly where the story is going to go, what dramatic turns it's going to take, and that in the end, everything is going to come out perfectly fine. So I don't need to tell you the story of the film, but I will. And I'd say spoiler alert, but you already know the entire story, so there's nothing I can spoil about this film for you. The film opens with a series of shots showing off nice scenery before it pans up onto the lone soldier staring off mysteriously into the distance before he turns his head slightly. This is followed by a series of cool shots showing off the art of capoeira. Now keep in mind, this is the major hook of the film because Only the Strong is considered to be the only Hollywood film to have capoeira be the main focus of the narrative. For those of you that don't know, capoeira is an Afro-Brazilian style of martial arts which combines elements of acrobatics, dance, and music. You'll likely remember it as the style of fighting used by Eddie Gordo from the Tekken games, or demonstrated by martial artist Lateef Crowder in the films Tom Yum Goong, Undisputed 3, and even in the Tekken film where he actually did play Eddie Gordo. It was a small part, but he looked to perform the part spot on, and that was a terrible film. Anyway, so our protagonist Louis Stevens returns to his Miami high school to find it a haven for gangs and drug dealers with all the students having no hope for a future. The teacher that once inspired him has now become a hollow shell of his former self, until Stevens uses his martial arts to kick the asses of several drug dealers on school grounds. And this scene plays out like it's such a typical thing to be occurring in the story. Hi honey, how was school today? Yeah, not bad. A 30-year-old man came in and beat up a bunch of Jamaican drug dealers using a whole series of cool acrobatics. Okay, so a pretty normal Tuesday. Sounds about right. Of course, all the troubled students cheer on when they see this violence taking place, so the teacher is all like, if violence is what inspires these students, let's teach them how to be violent, but look really cool in the process. One of the other teachers, who the audience is not meant to be rooting for, actually puts it perfectly.
Teach violence to violent kids.
Now obviously, when you're learning martial arts, the entire purpose of learning it is to develop a sense of discipline and self-confidence so that you don't go out and misuse it and become the bully from the Karate Kid. But none of the characters even try to explain that. The protagonist immediately just gives up and tries to walk out of the room without even a second glance. No mention of the spiritual aspect of martial arts training, no mention of the self-respect or discipline that it teaches you, just, you don't like it? Okay, well...
Here you go, and you're going home. Good! You deserve to die, you little bastard!
The school only decides to proceed with this plan when the generic love interest says, well, the rest of us are fresh the fuck out of ideas, so why don't we teach angry, violent youths how to fight? The conversation ends right there, and the film cuts to the next scene. So nobody even tries to finish the scene with any conversation about it. The end of this scene is the definitive point where you know the script has just been thrown out the window. So yeah, we know we're not in for a good film by this point. The next two scenes show Stevens shamelessly flirting with a generic love interest and then searching for a place to teach capoeira before we break into a Revenge of the Nerds style cleaning montage, which is actually more typical of 80s films, whereas this film was released in 1993. Next we have day one of Stevens' classes, where none of the students take anything seriously until one challenges Stevens to a fight. Stevens spends the entire fight cartwheeling and backflipping away from the student before disarming him by simply causing him to trip over. Over the next few scenes we see Stevens begins to teach students one by one, to the point where they start using capoeira to defend themselves amongst school bullies. Then Only the Strong takes a huge detour into dramatic territory. It turns out that Orlando, the student who fought him earlier, is cousins with a drug lord named Silverio, who also just so happens to be a master of capoeira. They engage in a cool fight scene, Stevens loses, and we know this is setting up for a redemption arc that's going to come back at the end. Then there's a montage of training shots, and then a scene where Stevens takes his students on a camping trip and they're too scared to leave the bus at night. Then there's another montage of training shots. By this point in the film, it literally seems like writer-director Sheldon Lettich had only written 40 pages of script for this film. Then as he was revising, it was like, yeah, let's put a montage scene here, that'll fill up like 4 pages. Oh, and another one here. One of the biggest criticisms of Only the Strong is that it just tries to hide its lack of ideas behind cool martial arts choreography. Honestly, it doesn't even try to hide that, but yeah, it does that pretty shamelessly. Then we have a scene where Stevens reaches Orlando on an emotional level, and it's full of the most generic dialogue known to man. When talking about his destiny to follow his family crime roots, Orlando says this line.
Stripping cars is all I know.
Seriously, the way he says it is so ridiculously dramatic and so soulless at the same time. The standard for acting in this film does not live up to a film titled Only the Strong. Anyway, Orlando goes back and says he won't be a slave to his drug lord cousin, Stevens intervenes again, and the film hits new dramatic heights. Silverio declares war on Stevens and decides to get his gang to actually attack the school. They terrorize the school by slashing car tires, setting the school on fire, beating up students. Now let's just take a step back and think about this for a second. Our protagonist Stevens, he's not trying to put an end to Silverio's drug empire. He's just saying, don't drag one of my students into this. He's not saying, I want you to stop selling drugs on the street, I want you to stop terrorizing people, just let my student live the life he wants to live and don't force him against his will into a life of crime just because he's somehow related to you. And Silverio then decides that Stevens is his biggest enemy, not the other drug lords in Miami, not the police that have to be chasing him and trying to prosecute him. No, just a school teacher who is trying to protect the best interests, health and safety of one of his students. You have a teacher at an inner city public school for struggling students going up against a drug lord. The only thing I can compare this to is the time an American teenager went up against the Yakuza gang in the Fast and the Furious 3 Tokyo Drift. But with all due respect, Only the Strong is way less pretentious than Tokyo Drift, even though I do like that film as well. As a result of the school being attacked, one of the students dies. Stevens gets blamed for it, he gets fired, and his program gets shut down. So Stevens decides to go macho military man on everything and start kicking ass. He beats up 2 of Silverio's criminals to add fuel to the flame, then goes and confronts them all at the beach. And as Silverio's gang descends upon Stevens, his students show up and stand their ground. Troubled high school students standing up against a ruthless drug gang. Just think about that. You are just waiting for one of them to shout, Wolverines! Because this is some kind of Red Dawn fantasy that's going on here. Either that, or you're just waiting for them all to start chanting, Oh Captain, my Captain. Because this is the action equivalent of the end scene to Dead Poet Society. Them all standing up to an authority they don't agree with. Then Stevens and Silverio fight again. And with the power of good cheer behind him, Stevens wins this time. Everyone cheers. And then the police finally arrive and arrest Silverio. The police didn't do jack shit when there were drug dealers trying to sell their product on a school ground. They weren't subtle about it, they were very loud about it. And they didn't do jack shit when there was a gang setting a school on fire, burning it down, killing students. But now that a public school teacher has defeated a drug lord, they're gonna swoop in and take the credit for it all. Yeah, great job, coppers. Honestly, the police might have been the real villains of the story if you think about it. After all this, we see the students graduate and then the film is over. Is Only the Strong a bad film? No, I hesitate to use the word bad. Is it a quality film? Hell no. It's an overly optimistic film which simplifies a very complex issue and relies on cheesy jingoism to carry the narrative. But honestly, that's what I like about it. The film is so easy to watch because it's generic and familiar, but also because on some level it's trying to be inspirational. The optimistic tone of the film has a certain degree of charm for it, which just kind of reels you in if you can look past the ridiculousness of a lot of the story. If you strip away the tone of the film, it's a very pretentious story that suggests that teaching martial arts to inner city school students could teach them to one day overthrow a drug gang. Critic Gary Thompson put it perfectly. Solved. The problem of impoverished, understaffed, crime-ridden, drug-infested inner-city schools. The solution. Bongo music and a new Brazilian brand of martial arts that transforms incorrigible students into zealous anti-crime mercenaries. Even Roger Ebert himself said, "I have a sinking feeling that the makers of this film feel it is in some way exemplary and even useful." The most simple-minded viewers of this film might take the message of the story a little too literally, but that's not really a bad thing if they do. I mean, if angry, misbehaving audiences take the message from this film that they can turn their lives around by going out and learning martial arts, then they should do it. And even though it does seem like that's what the directors wanted, it's really hard to take this film seriously at all. Critic Stephen Holden didn't like the film, but he put it perfectly when he said that Only the Strong exists solely for its fight sequences and to show off its stars' muscles and gymnastic grace. It's a feature-length display of capoeira, and honestly, it's really cool to look at. If you look at the acrobatics and the neatly choreographed fight scenes, they're really entertaining to watch. They're not like the generic fight scenes you get from lesser quality action films such as Stone Cold. They actually have a decent amount of grace and artistic choreography to them. The amount of slow motion and the editing might throw some viewers off, but I feel like it's used pretty well here, honestly. And as pretentious as its story is, at least Only the Strong went out and tried to do something new with its narrative. It didn't try to be just another version of Die Hard, Rambo 2, or Commando. It actually tried to follow the formula of Dead Poet Society and make it into an action film. Whether or not that's a good idea could be up for debate, but at least the creators had the ambition to try something different. And that gives Only the Strong enough individuality to stand out of the crowd. Most impressive about this film is its star, Mark Dacascos. He had no capoeira experience prior to this film. He was very well experienced in one-hop kendo, Muay Thai, and Wushu, but the only reason he learned capoeira was simply so that he could audition for this film. And the way he performs capoeira in all the film's action or training scenes, he just seems so natural at it. He's a very talented martial artist, and he shows it off in this film. He also has a very natural likability to himself. He's very lighthearted when he delivers some of the corny dialogue, like when he's flirting with the love interest.
Can I help you carry something? Anything in your books?
Thanks, we're not in high school anymore.
No, we're not, and you shouldn't act like it. So, I can take you someplace nice now.
But he's also very restrained in showing his emotions when it comes to the film's more dramatic scenes. And I don't know if it's the fact that that contrasts to everyone else's over-the-top, pretentious dramatic line delivery.
Man, you don't know nothing about anybody here.
Whatever. I'm a reasonable man. Just tell me what you need.
But it just goes to show he does have a good amount of charisma. And we all got to see that when he played Zero in John Wick 3 Parabellum, which he was awesome in.
I gotta tell you, I've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time. I'm a huge fan. John Wick. Mr. Wicker.
Those two films go to show that Mark Dacascos is really an underappreciated talent. He's a very talented martial artist and a fairly charismatic action hero who just never really landed the right role. At least until John Wick 3 came along. Now he's got a recurring role in a Netflix series called Wu Assassins, which is earning pretty high praise. As a final note, the funniest thing about Only the Strong is that it actually did speak to me on a certain level. When I was 10, I started training in Goju Ryu karate, and I was a very misbehaved little kid. My sensei himself actually said he didn't expect me to go past 2 years because I was so poorly behaved. And while I was training, I grew into a depressed teenager who was always struggling to find my path in life. But honestly, training in karate really helped me do that. It gave me a sense of discipline, self-respect, guidance, and I just stuck with it. 14 years later, get this, I actually teach karate for a living. That is my part-time job. So on that level, I'm able to sympathize with Lewis Stevens in the story because he's a martial arts teacher just like I am. I mean, my students aren't at-risk inner-city teenagers related to drug kingpins that are trying to drag them into a life of crime. I mean, at least as far as I know. I hope not. But to think that what they're learning could be helping to shape them and guide them on the same positive path trajectory that I went along from learning it, it's a really inspiring thing. And even though Only the Strong doesn't explain that deeper theme, I feel like people who have an understanding of martial artists can see and appreciate that element of the film because there is an underlying depth to the film which never gets explored, but some people will find could be implied within the narrative.
Because of the implication.
So to wrap it all up, Only the Strong has a lot more ambition than most generic action films. It may be pretentious and cheesy, which is what gets it a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, but it's also laughable and charming, which is what gets it a 77% rating from audiences. And for a film with a budget of only $6 million, it actually transcends the quality of a lot of other action films that came out that year, such as Sniper or The Point of No Return. Now, if you want to debate me on that one and say that either of those films are higher in quality than Only the Strong, then please feel free to leave your comments in the comment section below and I'll happily discuss it with you. So in my opinion, Only the Strong gets 6 stars out of 10. I don't think I would buy it on DVD, but if it was playing on late night TV, I would definitely sit back and watch it if I had nothing else to do, because it's a charming film in its own way. So, that does it for today's episode of Delightfully Devilish. If you have any other ideas of films that you want me to check out and possibly review, please leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, if you want to see more episodes of this series, please click the subscribe button. So until next time, I'm Jukebox Harry. Peace.